All right, you guys, it is 6:02, 6:03. So we are going to jump in and get started. Tonight we are looking at Acts chapter 17, verses 16 through 34. It's Paul going to Athens in his speech before the Areopagus. And so we'll jump in just a moment. But I just want to share, this is fun. It's not connected to the Bible study, but something that happened today. We're getting the girls ready for school. And, you know, part of it is you make their lunches and you put the lunches in the book bag and you do the whole thing, right? And I'm putting Evie's stuff in her book bag. Evie's my middle child. And there's a note in the book bag. And so I took it out and I read it. And here's the note. Dear Shanice, I heard that you're messing with my sister. And that's okay. But you are teasing her too much. So you better stop teasing her, ... or else. Oh, your friend, Evie, with 3 hearts after it. So y'all, listen, I told Sarah, I said, number one, we cannot let her send that to school. That's a bad idea. So I just took it and put it away. And I said, you know, where I was growing up, if you said or else, you better know what that or else is. So I asked Evie when she got home, I said, sweetheart, number one, I'm proud of you for caring about your sister, right? That's beautiful. It's very good. I said, Miriam, yeah. So I said, I'm just curious, and we talked about how this is probably not the most appropriate form of response to people not being kind. And I said, but I am curious, what was the or else? And she said, I was going to pinch her. I thought, you better do more to Shanice than pinch her with the or else, y'all. So pinch and run quickly. Children, you know, I mean, on the one hand, I'm like loyal to her sister, loves her sister. How do you teach your children? And how important is it to do that? I mean, it's so important right now at this early, tender age to teach them that ethic of Jesus. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to them also. And what does that mean for these kids? That you're not bullied, but it's a way to, anyway, it's a whole nother thing. But those are fun moments for me because I get to tuck them away. And now they are at the point where I can't use those illustrations in sermons anymore because they get mad at me. So I'll share them with y'all on Wednesday night, and it's good. So Acts chapter 17, verses 16 to 34. And what I want to do is I just want to read it, and then we're going to jump in. So here we go. Acts 17, 16 to 34. So Paul waited in Athens. While he was there, his spirit was stirred up as he saw the whole city simply full of idols. He argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearers, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers were disputing with him. What can this word scatterer be on about, some were saying. He seems to be proclaiming foreign divinities, declared others, since he was preaching Jesus and anastasis. Anastasis in Greek means resurrection. So they took him up to the Areopagus. Are we able to know, they said, what this new teaching really is that you're talking about? You're putting very strange ideas into our minds. We'd like to find out what it all means. All the Athenians and the foreigners who live there spend their time simply and solely in telling and hearing the latest novelty. So Paul stood up in the midst of the Areopagus. Men of Athens, he said, I see that you are in every way an extremely religious people. For as I was going along and looking at your objects of worship, I saw an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. Well, I'm here to tell you about what it is that you're worshiping in ignorance. The God who made the world and everything in it, the one who is Lord of heaven and earth, doesn't live in temples made by human hands, nor does he need to be looked after by human hands as though he lacked something, since he himself gives life and breath to all things to everyone. He made from one stock every race of humans to live on the whole face of the earth, allotting them their properly ordained times and the boundaries for their dwellings. The aim was that they would search for God and perhaps reach out for him and find him. Indeed, he's actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as also some of your own poets have it. we are his offspring. Well, then, if we really are his offspring, we ought not to be surprised that the divinity is like gold or is not. We are not to suppose that the divinity is like gold or silver or stone formed by human skill and ingenuity. That was just ignorance. But the time for it has passed, and God has drawn a veil over it. Now, instead, he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has established a day on which he intends to call the world to account with full and proper justice by a man whom he has appointed. God has given all people his pledge of this by raising this man from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them ridiculed Paul, but others said, "We will give you another hearing about this." So Paul went out from their presence. But some of the people joined him and believed, including Dionysius, a member of the court of the Areopagus, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them as well. And so what I'm going to do tonight is just talk about some broad themes that are present in what is arguably one of Paul's most famous speeches that he makes. And a couple of things we need to talk about first, some misconceptions about what's going on. I just read that entire speech to you in roughly 3 minutes. And so what we have to remember is that this is not intended to be a whole picture of what Paul had presented. You got to remember, Paul is a guy, for example, who preached so long a kid fell out of a window and died, right? He was lengthy. He had the ability to go on for quite some time. And so his sermon we'll get to it in a minute, his defense would have been much, much longer than that. So Luke is intentional about framing this really as the highlights of what's going on. Now, this to me is where what I want to talk about next is, to me, the most interesting piece of the entire conversation tonight. Because most of us, when we get to this story with Paul in Athens, we think, okay, he's in the synagogue, he's talking about Jesus, and some of the Stoics and the Epicureans hear him, and they're interested and they want to hear more. And so they say, we'd like to hear more about this. So they all go to the Areopagus, which is a Greek debate center, so we're led to believe. And what happens in there is that there is a conversation that goes back and forth, and that Paul is engaged in evangelism, that the goal of Acts 17 is Paul is sharing the gospel with pagans, and it really is an evangelistic opportunity. And we traditionally have taken a passage, this entire story, and read it through that lens. How do we talk about Jesus with people who don't know anything about him? That's how we've tended to think about it, as though this was really a philosophical conversation. And what I want us to think about deeply, and if you read the book, you're going to know this already, is that in fact is not what is happening. While I do think we can glean some things from Paul about how do we talk about the gospel with people who don't know anything about Jesus, this is far from just a philosophical conversation. There's so much more going on if we understand the context and the culture in which this is being written. And so the setting in Athens is this, that the Areopagus was not a debating society. It was a law court. It was the highest court in all of Athens. It was composed of the leading citizens, founded jointly, according to legend, by the god Apollo and by Athens' own familial deity, the goddess Athene. The point of this story, you guys, it's not a philosophical conversation, but it is a court. It's not a discussion group, but Paul is being brought in front of this court, the Areopagus in Athens, and he is being asked to defend what he is saying. And if he is found guilty of introducing foreign divinities, then he might face death. So it's not an evangelistic conversation, although we can glean things from it. It's Paul's public defense of the gospel. In verse 19, Luke says that they took him up to the Areopagus. The Greek word epilabano means to seize or to arrest. And so they go to Paul and they say, we want to hear more about these foreign divinities. And so they take him, they seize him, and he goes up to the Areopagus. Y'all, this is not a fun conversation where you think about some philosophers sitting around the coffee shops and talking. But Paul is being taken to the Areopagus in front of the most prominent citizens in Athens, and when others could join as well. The only other building in the whole of Athens that would have been as kind of magnificent as the Areopagus would have been the Parthenon, the home of Athene, who was Greece's own patron god. And so people would have gathered and they would have listened. But this was not just a fun conversation, y'all. This was Paul giving a defense of what he was doing. I want you to remember Socrates, right? Everybody remembers Socrates. Socrates was one of the great teachers, Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. And in 339 BC, Socrates was brought in front of the Areopagus. He was brought in front of the leading citizens of Athens, and he was accused of what? Introducing new divinities. He was teaching strange things to the people and misleading the youth. And when you introduce strange divinities, you get in trouble for it. Why? Hold on, let me make sure. Okay, nope, I went too far. Because if you introduce strange divinities, then you are introducing the potential for trouble. Because keeping the gods happy was central not only to personal order, but to civic order. And so if you're introducing new things, new powers, new gods, the potential for that is devastating. And so what happens with Socrates is he goes in front of the Areopagus, and he's found guilty. And what does he do? He eats the hemlock, and he dies a noble death. When Paul goes in front of the Areopagus, it's the very same sort of thing. He's introducing new divinities. But when we get to Paul standing in front of the Areopagus, again, not an evangelistic sort of conversation, but he is confronting the local culture. He yes, seeks to find some common ground, right? We tend to think this is evangelism, trying to find common ground with people who aren't like us, and there's some of that. But most importantly, what Paul is doing, and we're going to come to the 4 ways in particular, he is confronting the local culture and pointing out to them the places and the spaces where they have misunderstood the nature of who God really is. The underlying point is that he could not be bringing foreign divinities, right? I see that you already have the tomb to the unknown God, right? He's not trying to find common ground with the citizens of Athens. His underlying point is that he couldn't be bringing foreign divinities. I'm not guilty of the charge that you're leveling against me. I don't need the fate of Socrates, basically, because the God he was proclaiming is already being worshiped in Athens, albeit in ignorance. He's saying, listen, you guys, you see that this unknown God, I'm not proclaiming anything that you don't already see something out there and you don't understand it. So I'm here to explain it to you. I'm not introducing foreign divinities. I'm coming to share the good news of the gospel with you. So that's what this is about. For Paul in Athens, it's a matter of explaining the faith to a hostile audience who were already suspicious that Christianity could be a dangerous force in the world. If you remember, at this point, we're in Acts chapter 20. Paul's gone to Ephesus, and what happens? He gets run out of town because he's introducing Christianity and proclaiming that Jesus is the true God of the world, the true Lord over all creation, and great is Artemis of the Ephesians, but she's nothing. And the same sort of thing is happening right here. And so now he has said, I can't be introducing these false gods. I'm not introducing foreign divinities. I am proclaiming to you the thing that you say is unknown. So let's get into the speech in particular. And I think, y'all, I'm glad I made this so big so y'all could see it so clearly, right? There are 4 basic points to this speech. And we're going to move through it, not at a breakneck pace, but we're not going to dwell too long. So the first thing is that to an unknown God, right? He says, I see how religious you are in every way. You even have the altar to the unknown God. This was not an attempt on Paul's part to find a fixed point in the local culture from which he could build a theological argument. He's not trying to find a common ground with them. He's trying to make sure he doesn't get executed. The point about the unknown God was that it was precisely not a fixed point. This is a quote from the book. It was, as it were, a question mark. It's an open window looking out from within the culture. There's an unknown God that you think you know there's something else out there that you need to pay homage to, that you need to respect, that you know is out there. And Paul sees it as an open window, looking out from within the culture to something or someone else without knowing what that thing might be. I see you're very religious in every way. You even have an altar to an unknown God. And we'll get to it in a minute, but he says, I'm here to tell you who that God really is. But the question for me, and the question in the book, really is the unknown God. What are today's altars to an unknown God? What are the signposts in an increasingly secularized culture? What are the things that we could point to as followers of Jesus that people look at and they maybe see, to use the image of, you lay some concrete down, right, and it kills all the grass, but every once in a while you see some grass shooting up from the cracks. Where are the places in a secularized culture where we see people still grasping for something more, for something beautiful? For me, you guys, I'm using N.T. Wright again. He wrote a really wonderful book called Simply Christian, and he talks about why Christianity makes sense. And he says that deep inside of us, we all yearn for things like beauty. We all yearn for things like justice. We all have these things deep inside of us. Who doesn't, you guys? I mean, when I talk to people about where do you experience God, what do most people say? Who said church? That I never hear that in you. I love your answer, and that is in fact where. But most people, particularly secularized people, which we all have some of this inside of us, at the beach. When I'm sitting out on the beach looking over the sunset, I see, and I experience something holy. When we ride in the mountains and we see the beauty and the grandeur of God's creation. And what I would say is this is a moment, right, where people still we know there's something out there and I can't quite figure it out. And it's an opportunity for us to say, actually, what you proclaim as unknown, we are here to tell you what it actually is. It's amazing to me, you guys. Sarah and I took the kids to New York, right, in December. And you go to New York in December, and you're there to see all the Christmas lights, right? You're there to see everything. You're there to see the Rockefeller Christmas tree. But there's also there a place called St. Patrick's Cathedral, this beautiful piece of Gothic architecture in one of the most secular cities in the United States of America. And there are thousands of people who are streaming in to this building because they still experience something that is sacred and holy. It's grass growing up in the concrete, right? They don't quite know what it is anymore, but it's something. And Paul says, you even have an altar to this thing, and you don't know what it is, but I'm here to tell you what it is. There are so many spaces in our culture where there are altars to the unknown God. And the goal of Christian faith is to be able to say, here's what it is. I'm here to share the good news with you. And so I would ask you, where are today's altars to the unknown God? The second thing he says is, I see that you're very religious in every single way, and you've got idols to everything. Now, y'all, let's stop on this for just a few minutes, because for us, and we'll come back, idols seem silly. Idols seem ridiculous. Apollo, Zeus, Athene, whatever they are. Now they're the stuff of children's fairy tales, aren't they? My kid reads Percy Jackson books that's got all the gods in it, right? My kid reads Harry Potter, which has a lot of Greek mythological themes in it. We laugh at this sort of stuff, although I'm going to tell you in a minute, I don't think we should. But I want you to remember something, that the worship of idols was absolutely everywhere. And in the ancient world, everybody assumed that keeping the gods happy was vital for personal and civic well-being. Worshiping, imagine idols were to the ancient world what electricity is to the modern world. We could not imagine our lives without it. When chaos and like your power goes off for a couple of hours and you're like, we need to get a whole house generator tomorrow, y'all. You can't imagine it. It's the same sort of thing. The idols were everywhere. As you go into the agora, which is the public center where you buy and sell goods, you give an offering to the gods. Temple, as Paul stood at the Areopagus, and it was on one of the hills in Greece, he would have looked out over and seen literally hundreds of temples dedicated to every single kind of god you could have imagined, from fertility to success in business to money to sexuality. Everything you could imagine, there was a god for that. They took it for granted. And you guys, worshiping the idols, worshiping the gods, it's vital for personal and civic well-being. When things went wrong, when famine broke out, when disease broke out, the first people that they blamed were those that didn't sacrifice to the gods. When Rome caught fire in 60-something AD, who did Nero blame? The Christians, because they didn't sacrifice to the gods, so it must have been their fault. So he killed them all, crucified them. It was part and parcel of the world in which they lived. And while we might laugh at it, here's what I want us to think deeply about right now. That the gods and the gods might be fake. The gods might not be real. Paul says they aren't. We know they aren't. But idols and idolatry is more real today than it has ever been. Wouldn't you agree? So the question is, where are the idols of our day? Where are the idols of our day? And if you read the book, a few that Wright mentions that we ought to think about are the god Mammon, the god money. I love stats, y'all. You know I love stats, and I had not seen this. And in 2023, there was a study there was a poll that was released that Americans put more hope and find the most importance in their money than anything else in the whole of their lives. Right? I mean, think about this. How much time do we spend thinking about our money? Either how much we have, or how much we wish we had, or how much we spend, or how much we're going to need for retirement. And we spend all of our time thinking about money, and we forget that Jesus says you cannot serve both God and money. He talks about mammon is as real a god as it has ever been. He talks about Aphrodite, the god of sexuality. And if you don't think that we live in a world where Aphrodite is worshiped, you, my friends, are absolutely wrong. I was reading in Christianity Today recently, and they were talking about some of the trends that are happening on the internet right now. And there is one website in particular. It's a website called Pornhub.com. As you might imagine, it's a pornography website. It is now the fourth most frequented website in the world. In the world, you guys. If we don't think that there is an epidemic of worship of Aphrodite, we have fooled ourselves. The big cultural events that we celebrate, the Oscars, the Emmys, the whatever your award show is. I'm looking around the room. I don't know that we got a whole lot of those here, right? But that's, in pop culture, that's what it is. Watch the red carpet. What do you see? But the sexualization of women and also of men, right? Time magazine or People magazine has the most the sexiest man alive. Any major event, right? And we could harp on this forever, but the one that struck me, y'all, the fourth most popular website in the world is pornography. It's insane. He says the god Mars, who is the god of war, the god of power, is also still worshiped in our day and age, isn't it? Yeah, man, where are the idols of our day and age? Because the reality is they are real. They are more real than we could ever imagine. And what I don't want you to do, please, I'm begging you, don't do this. Don't read this and think about somebody else. Think about yourself, because this is for us. Christians do a great deal of talk about sin. Yeah, right? Christians do a great deal of talk about sin. And we talk about all the things that people do wrong, and that's okay. It's necessary. But Wright says in this chapter where he's talking about idolatry, he says sin is what happens when you worship an idol. So sin is a symptom of a larger sickness. And if you want to heal someone of their sickness, you don't treat, yes, you look at the symptom, but there's a deeper illness at root. Paul's addressing the illness. He's getting to the heart of the matter. And he doesn't talk about all the things that the Athenians are doing wrong. In fact, he says, I see that you are very religious people in every way. He compliments them. But then he says, you guys are worshiping these idols, and you know they're not real, right? God does not live in a home made with human hands. And by the way, that's not a good way to make friends, is it? Sitting at the Areopagus, looking over literally hundreds of temples, where it almost certainly there would have been people processing by him, and dances happening and rituals occurring and sacrifices going to be made. And Paul in that moment is saying, you guys know those aren't real, right? Calling it out. He's addressing what is at the root. Sin is what happens when you worship an idol and let it dictate your behavior. Idolatry is the real problem. Modern Christianity has moralized everything. We do great at talking about sin, but what we don't do a great job talking about is what is really at the core, idolatry. Because what matters is what you worship. What matters is what you worship. James K.A. Smith wrote a wonderful book called You Are What You Love. And basically in this book, he says, we as Western people tend to think that we are thinking things. I think, cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. But we are not primarily thinking things. We are primarily loving things. And you are not what you think. You are what you love. And another way James K.A. Smith frames this is he says, and you love what you worship. You worship what you love. You see, you become like the thing that you worship. If you worship power, then you're going to spend way too much time watching cable news. Nobody said amen, and you should have. And let me tell you something. You know what's going to happen to you? You're going to become mean and angry because power's the end goal. If you worship sexuality, you're going to spend all your time dreaming about beauty that ultimately fades, and you're always going to feel ugly, right? You become like what you worship. If you worship money, you're going to become greedy. And you're going to become obsessed with something that ultimately will lead you to death. Man, I've never been to somebody's funeral and what they said was, he had more money than anybody you could ever know. Because it doesn't matter. We become like the thing that we worship. So the question is, what do you worship? Again, don't think about other people, think about yourself. Tim Keller, a great pastor, said, if you want to know what is an idol in your life, think about what is the thing that you cannot imagine your life without? What is the thing that you cannot imagine your life without? And if the answer is anything other than God, then it is an idol. It can be a good thing, right? Y'all, I love my children more than anything in this world, right? Maybe second to Sarah. I love these children more than anything in this world, and I would die for them. But if I worship my family, my nuclear family, I create an idol out of them. And more importantly, what I also do is I forget that Jesus said, "Who are my mother and my brother and my sisters? But those who do the will of God." And we worship something, and it always has a side effect. What is the thing you cannot imagine your life without? And Paul says, it's not worth giving your life to unless it's Jesus. And so the third thing that he does is he talks about the philosophers. And he does this kind of in a roundabout way as he quotes the poets, and he talks about God is near to you. God is not far from you. In him you live and move and have your being. And so let's take a step back, and he addresses really the two types of philosophers that were ever present in Greece at the time, in Athens, and the two that were present just before he goes to the Areopagus. He talks about the Stoics and the Epicureans. And finally, he'll get to the Academy, but that's all one off. So let's briefly talk about who are the Stoics, who are the Epicureans, and then the Academy. So these were the primary schools of philosophy, and don't zone out on me, because they are still present with us today. Because the Stoics generally, and sorry again, I'm glad I made it so big for you. There is one divine force. It's in everything. It's around everything. It's animating everything and animating everyone. Right? It's basically pantheism. God is in all, right? But the problem with that, the problem with the Stoic way of thinking was that you couldn't address evil. Because God was connected to everything, every action, every reaction. It was all part of God, and everything emanates and flows from that God. And so the difficulty became you couldn't address evil. And so you just went on with life the best you could, and you develop a stiff upper lip, and you just keep going. Hence the word Stoic. And one of the trademarks of a Stoic death was to maybe die a noble, dignified suicide, right? What does Socrates do? Takes the hemlock. Hey guys, don't worry about me. Everything's fine. Can't address evil. Can't address difficulty, right? And it's fine. And what Paul says to the Stoics is that there is evil in the world. There is evil in the world, and God has appointed a day. And he has appointed a man who will judge the world and who will put things right. And God has shown us this by the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. It's interesting, he doesn't say Jesus, but he says through the man that he resurrected from the dead. But we'll get to that in a minute. The big thing to realize is he counters the Stoics by saying, no, this story does have a solution for evil. It doesn't say it's all part of God's plan. When somebody dies of a freak accident or somebody dies in a tsunami, when we say things like, well, it's all part of God's plan, you know what we're doing? We're embodying the Stoics. No, y'all, bad things happen because the world isn't as it was intended to be. But Paul says one day, God is going to make it right through the man that was resurrected from the dead by his power. All right, so the second group of people are the Epicureans. And basically the Epicureans said that there is a God, there are many gods, but they're a long way away from us. They don't care about us. They don't have anything to do with us. And so, guys, here's what you do. You recognize that human life is what it is, and the best you can do is to pursue rational pleasure. Just do whatever you want, because the gods don't care, and the gods are far away, and they don't. Once you die, you're dead. So, in the words of the great Epicurean Dave Matthews, eat, drink, and be merry. because tomorrow will die. That's also somewhere in the Bible, right? But he popularizes it and says, listen, nothing matters. Maybe there's a God. We'll come back to this in a minute. Because what Paul says to the Epicureans is, God is the one through whom and in whom we have our being. Everything was created. And guys, he is close to us. Your story says God is far away, so it doesn't matter. But the story I'm proclaiming to you is that God is very near. And God cares about you. And God has a plan for you. And God loves you. And God's one day going to make everything right? This is beautiful. And then there's the academy, which is continuing the school of Plato. There is no clear solution, right? The Stoics don't get it right. The Epicureans don't get it right. And so, given our lack of general knowledge and no consensus, no clear solution, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to continue to follow the old religious customs. Partly because it keeps everything in line, keeps everything in order. If everybody continues to sacrifice to the gods, we're going to be okay. And maybe there might be some truth in it. Maybe. To me, this way of thinking is basically tantamount to much of American Christianity for a long portion of our history. I don't know if I believe this stuff, but it's good to go to church on Sunday. I don't know if I actually think this stuff is true, but we'll have moral chaos if we don't continue to do the things we've always done, right? Church is a habit rather than something that has shaped you. Paul says, no. That isn't what God's doing either. Guys, interestingly, what N.T. Wright says is that we are modern day Epicureans. That we typically think maybe there's a God, but he's somewhere far off, and so we get to do what we want to do, how we want to do it, because we are the ones who are ultimately in charge. We are modern day Epicureans, not to go on too long a historical bent, but when the French Revolution happens and they overthrow the monarchy, they print new money. And do you know what they officially put on their new money? That it is year 1. We are starting a new world order where we are in charge. The clergy have no place. The church has no place. God has no place. We are running the show now. Epicurean thought. Look on our money. Novum ortum secolorum. New world order. God is cast off, and we are the ones who make the decisions. We are the ones who run the show. Without any regard, we are modern day Epicureans. And so interestingly, y'all, the final thing, the final thing that he talks about, and let me see here, I want to make sure I get this right. Putting the world right. And to me, this is the biggest one. This is the most important piece. As he stands in front of the Areopagus and he defends the faith, he defends who he is. I am not introducing foreign divinities, but I'm proclaiming to you the thing that has been there all along, and now I'm telling you that there is coming a day when God's going to make everything right. God is going to put the world right. Counter to what the Epicureans thought, counter to what the Stoics thought. I'm telling you that God is going to restore and renew and redeem and recreate all things. Do you know how? Because God raised this Jesus from the dead. Interestingly, y'all, when he seeks to explain the truth of the gospel to a people that don't know anything about Jesus, he doesn't talk about the cross, does he? It's central. Y'all, in the Christianity I grew up with, all we heard about was the cross. All I heard about all the time, period, was Jesus Christ died for your sins so that you can go to heaven when you die. Period. End of story. And when we read what Paul is saying to the Athenians in Acts chapter 17, he says, God has resurrected Jesus from the dead, and the day will come when this man will return to judge the earth and to make it right. God's judgment, y'all, is not something to be feared. It's something to be welcomed. It's something to be celebrated. Because if you go and you read the prophets of the Old Testament, Isaiah says that the day will come when the mountains are going to cry out. And the rocks are going to sing and the animals are going to celebrate because God's finally come home and he's made it right. In Romans chapter 8, Paul says that creation is groaning for the day when God's children will be revealed because everything will be made right. Paul stands in front of these people and he says, there's going to be a day when God's going to return, when King Jesus is going to return and he's going to make it all right. Do you know how we know that? Because Jesus has been raised from the dead, and I'm going to break that television if I hit. And so the way the story ends, so interestingly to me, is that it says, Paul went out from their presence. When we talk about the resurrection and the centrality of the resurrection and that there is a story and there is a God who's going to make all things right. Guys, do you know something? People are going to laugh at us. People in a sophisticated modern world are going to say this is rubbish. And that's what they do mostly to Paul. They sneer at him, it says. But some people listened, and that's beautiful. But the main point of the story is he went out from their presence. He went to the Areopagus with a legal defense. His life was on the line. Tell us about these foreign divinities. No, they're not foreign at all. But this is the creator God who made everything. And you worship the sun, but that's not what God really is. You worship the moon, but that's not what God really is. You worship the ocean, Poseidon, and the God of the sea, but this God created all of it. And I'm here to tell you about him. And not only am I here to tell you about him through creation, but I'm here to tell you about him through his son, Jesus. That's what he does. And at the end of the day, he went out from their presence. We don't know if he was convicted, acquitted, or if they just say, okay, you're good, go on. But the point of the story is he goes out from their presence. Paul was suggesting to his skeptical audience that genuine Christian faith, anchored in the revelation of new creation in Jesus' resurrection, means faith in the Creator God, made known to us in Jesus, now embracing the whole world of creation and providence, of the strange and loving nearness of God. God is more near to you than you could ever imagine, and he wants you to know him. You grasp at him, and he wants you to know him. The nearness of God to his human creatures, and of his promise that one day God's going to make everything all right. God's going to restore everything. Do you know why? Because he raised Jesus from the dead. So that, y'all, is what is happening in Acts chapter 17. If you are reading the book, there's a fascinating section in there about postmodernity and all of the ways we use the gospel to talk about the postmodern condition, but that is not for tonight. So I'll stop 646. We got it all figured out, don't we? Questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Jimmy. Yeah, so in Greece, Paul doesn't mention it. You see how good that was? Yeah. Whew. 5 more years, I'm biting the dust, y'all. Whew. They could have. They could not have, because he was, at that point, he hasn't yet pulled the Roman citizen card. Because at that point, when he did, and Greece was a Roman colony, maybe not a proud Roman colony, but they were, at that point, he maybe would have said, you can't actually do this, I'm a Roman. Maybe he's got that Trump card in the back of his pocket. That is not an allusion to any contemporary political dynamics, but yeah. What else?
I heard a TV preacher when I was flipping channels say something that has really stuck with me. Mm-hmm. He said that whatever you worship, you have to lower yourself. Mm-hmm. Whatever you worship. You can't be equal if you worship something that goes above.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
commandment.
Yeah.
I just think about that, like, what is it that I put above even, what is it that I put even above myself?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ.
Sure.
Is there something else? It's just always haunted me. What is it that you could, because remember, whatever you worship, you have to be lower
Right.
to worship.
Right. Yeah. So what Pam was saying is a TV preacher she heard saying, whatever you worship, you have to put that above you. You have to be lower than that. Interestingly, Pam, I think maybe in our world, in our cultural moment, the thing that most of us maybe worship more than anything else is the self, right? YOLO, you only live once. The Burger King commercial, have it your way. Y'all, I did a funeral, and this was many years ago, and I met with the family, and y'all, you talk about the service, and we get to the end of it, and they said very seriously, Jimmy asked that his final song, as his casket is rolled out of the sanctuary, Frank Sinatra's I Did It My Way. They were serious, y'all. Because at the end of the day, we are autonomous. We are the masters of our own fate. We are the captain of our own ships. I did it my way. You know what I should have said was, how about we do Highway to Hell by AC/DC? Sarah said, well, y'all, I mean that in jest, obviously, right? But it is, y'all, seriously, that is a prime definition of idolatry. Because the goal is not to do it my way, it's to do it his way. Yeah. I'm serious. I want you to wrestle with what are the idols in your own life. It really ought to be a practical exercise to think through this. For me, as I walk away, those are the two things. Paul's, hey, here's the unknown God, and y'all know there's something out there. I'm here to tell you what it is. Where are the places that we have opportunity to speak to the longings of people's hearts? As we see 18 to 25-year-old boys, men, go out and become radicalized and become so obsessed with politics in unhealthy ways on both ends of the spectrum, they're yearning for something. How do we talk to them about it? Yeah. Where do we do it? How do we do it? And then what are the idols in your life?